Okay, so anything after the session, you feel free to ask Mr. Ong some of your questions. Okay, if things are not clear, you might want to chat with him as well. Okay.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Just to get a survey of the room, it's not a big crowd. How many are year 3? Okay. Year 2? Okay. So it's about 50-50. Okay. I think before we go into the stuff proper, just maybe I'll do a little bit of advertisement. My company, I work for a firm called P&T Consultants. We are an international architecture and engineering consultancy firm. We were established about 150 years ago by two Brits in Hong Kong, P. Palmer, T. Turner. That's how the company got its name. And today, 150 years later, we operate across almost a dozen offices in Asia, and we have projects across about 70 over cities around the world. And we have about 2,000 staff, 300 of which is in Singapore. Okay, so because we're about 150 years old, we've actually gone through the colonial period of many of the Asian cities. For Singapore, for example, one of the early works of the firm was the Goodwood Park Hotel. And of course, from that time, from the colonial period, as these cities have matured, we have actually had the opportunity to do many of the more interesting buildings that have shaped the skylines of cities like Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Bangkok. So just a quick run through of the kind of stuff that we have been doing. Mostly now recently, most of our work deals with high density, high rise buildings, office, mixed use, residential. Okay. So today we are actually 35th in the World Architecture List in 2019. And I'm here today to basically speak about your competition, your IBEW, International Built Environment Week. And the context of that is that I was invited to participate in the judging panel and invited to give this workshop. So in a way, to give my insight to you guys about the kind of stuff that we hope to see, the kind of thoughtfulness, the kind of thinking that we hope to see in the competition entries for your competition entries. So just to go through some of the items in the brief, you guys have been asked to design, the theme is to touch the earth lightly, to design a sustainable building on the natural environment. It's a co-working office building. The idea is to create a healthy community of millennial freelancers and small startup companies. And the idea is to basically enhance the culture of work. It's a maximum of 5 stories across a 7,000 square meter on 7,000 square meters of GFA on a 10,800 square meter site. So if you take your GFA, you divide it by 5 stories, you're talking about a floor plate of about 1,400 square meters. Just to put that into context, 1,400 square meters is probably the footprint of the older office buildings that you will find in the City Hall, Raffles Place area. The newer buildings that you'll find in the Raffles Place area, for instance, like ORQ, One Raffles Quay, which was like completed about almost 7 to 10 years ago. Those are buildings with about 2,000 to 2,500 square meter footprints. Okay, and of course, these footprints have gotten progressively larger. The newer office buildings, for example, Marina 1, they actually reach up to about 3,000 over square meters in building footprint. And these, of course, are buildings that cater to multinational companies that basically take office space by the floor. Okay. But since that you guys, I think one of the things to note is that you guys are designing a co-work space building, which is a slightly different environment. However, I'll be talking about co-work spaces in a little bit in a while. Okay, so of course, there's all of this is, I think, in the package that has been given to you as part of the competition entry. So you asked to design a green building, to consider design for manufacturing and assembly, which I'll be talking about, and as well as integrated digital delivery, which I will also be talking about in some of the projects that we've been working through. However, in a way, I do not want you guys to be so-called, in my experience working in the industry, especially in design competitions or design competitions to win a project, to win a prize or whatever, there tends to be in Singapore, in my experience, the tendency to be too focused on being exam smart, looking at the design the criteria, the percentage of breakdown as to the different criteria for winning. And I don't want you guys to focus too much on that. And I think it's good to add a little bit of thoughtfulness, a little bit of heart, a little bit of asking or trying to capture the spirit of the essence of what you guys are trying to do, which I think harks back to this idea of touching the earth lightly and to create a space that will enhance the culture of work. Okay, so I think all of these items in the brief you guys are quite familiar with, so I won't go through them too much anymore. Okay, so and that's why I've decided to call this workshop or whatever divide it in 3 parts. To design for people, design for place, and design for productivity, which will be the 3 different parts of what I'll be talking about this afternoon. Okay, so first we want to talk about designing for people. So we talked about needing to design a space for millennials, freelancers, and startups. Okay, so and the idea is to enhance the culture of work. So just a quick data about millennials, you guys, which are you guys when you guys enter the workforce. Okay, so Forbes magazine actually published an article, and they did a survey of what the millennials want. And the thing that actually takes the cake the most is the idea to make the world a better place. So millennials, you guys are an idealistic bunch, and we have to treat that as a positive thing. One of the interesting statistics that I like to say to people about millennials is to talk about the beer market. I think everybody here is above the age of 18, so I can talk about alcohol consumption. So when I speak about the beer market, for instance, in America, the biggest beer company, for example, is Budweiser. This is the brand of beer that people of my parents' generation would drink. And this company now is facing problems because younger people who consume alcohol are not interested in buying Budweiser. They want to buy the craft beers. They want to buy from the local breweries. They want to know that the products that they consume are farmed and using organic materials, and the products that come built in with a cause, so to speak. So this is basically one of the challenges of designing for millennials. And when we talk about millennials, we also want to talk about how workplace trends evolve. If you take a look at the statistic above, okay, 50 to 60% that the time employees spend at their desk has actually this number means that if you work from 9 to 6, you only spend about half that time on your desk, and thus as a result, okay, the size of the square footage per employee in an office space has reduced by 15% over the past several years. Actually, this statistic is in 2010, so it's 9 years later. So this number is rapidly actually decreasing. Okay, and this is why the idea of the evolution of the workspace is taking place. So if you take a look at an office like ours, like the company that I work for, we have about 300 people. This is basically the set of considerations that a company like ours, 300 over people, look at, which are very, very traditional criteria, design criteria, or criteria in deciding if an office space is suitable for them or not. Okay. But now, of course, the economy is evolving, and now, especially now in Singapore, there's basically a big push to encourage startups and freelancers. And so, of course, these freelancers are starting to move away from traditional big footprint office spaces, like the ones that my company is occupying right now, and move towards more co-working spaces. Okay. Now, of course, how do these co-working spaces work? So I think the best way I can describe a co-working space, for those of you who are not familiar, or if this thing has not yet been fully discussed in class, my best analogy for what a co-working space is that it's like a gym membership. Okay, if you guys, for example, open a small company, it's just you or a partner. Okay, you don't need to hire, you don't need to lease out a traditional office space using this criteria. Okay, you guys just need a small office space, and normally you would, sometimes for younger folks like yourself, you guys are happy to work in a McDonald's, in a Starbucks, to work in your bedroom. And then when the time comes for you guys to meet potential clients and to meet with other people that you work with, you guys look for a restaurant, a cafe to meet them. But of course, as a business evolves, okay, there will be a need to basically have a space that is a little bit more professional. But how do you do that if your company or your business is not of a size sufficient to necessitate hiring a traditional office space? And that was basically how co-working was born. So basically, rather than work from home or work in a coffee shop, you basically subscribe to a membership, or gym membership. Like I said, it's like a gym membership. And then the way it works is that there are different packages. Each package basically gives you different so-called perks. So for example, the most basic perk is to basically the opportunity to hot desk, which means you can go into the space, just flip your laptop open, and then you basically have a proper workspace. And then just like in a gym membership, if you want to go for an aerobics class or a yoga class, sometimes you pay a little bit extra to use a meeting room, to use printing facilities, to meet clients, and so on and so forth. So currently, there are many providers of these sorts of spaces. Some of them are actually listed over here. The biggest one is WeWork. WeWork, for instance, operates across several floors in Marina One. I was just talking about 3,000 square meter footprints. And these are more traditional office footprints. And that's why if you take a look at the addresses, they also vary. But if you also take a look at the addresses, this is pulled from an article of the 30 best co-work spaces in Singapore. You will also notice that some of the, while you also have the more traditional areas like Raffles Place, Orchard, okay, you also have a little bit more edgy type of areas. You can find them in places like Kent Ridge, even places like Ang Mo Kio in Outram, where you have so-called less traditional kind of office environments for different kinds of startup companies. And so I suggest, as part of your competition, for you guys to visit the websites of some of these companies and just see the kind of packages that are on offer. What do you get for $220, $250? You get a desk. You want an office. Roughly how much does it cost? Just to get an idea of how this system works all in all. Okay. Now, to illustrate this idea of one of the things that I want you guys to try to internalize about this design competition is to maybe think about who are the people who are going to be using this building. It's a building that you guys need to design somewhere in Coney Island at the edge of Punggol, okay, next to the future Punggol Digital District. So you have to think about people like yourselves who imagine yourselves 4 years, 5 years into the future wanting to start a small business, start a small company, and what kind of environment, what kind of spaces do you guys want to have? And are these the same kind of spaces that you would find in Orchard Road or Raffles Place or Marina Bay Financial Center? I personally do not think so. And that's why I wanted to show you guys one of the projects that we recently worked on. It's a competition. It was a design competition which we did not win. It was a land tender competition, so you don't win it based on merely your design. You also win it based on how much money your client is willing to fork out for the land, and so on and so forth. But we actually recently did a competition for a site in Holland Village. Okay, and one of the things that we think about, and I'm sure you guys probably spend a little bit of downtime in places like Holland Village, and one of the things that we thought about when we were designing this project was when we think about Holland Village, we think about those shop houses. And so what we thought about was we did not want to design a traditional shopping center or F&B restaurant kind of space in the Holland Village. We wanted to design something that's a little bit unique and very, very specific that captures the spirit of the place. So when we thought about Holland Village, we think about shop houses, restaurants, all of the buildings, very, very small, narrow frontages, and you basically walk the street and you walk from one shop or one restaurant to the other. A very, very unique flavor. It's not a generic shopping center where it's a big box and then all the different establishments are just plugged into that box. So we thought of wanting to do the same for our retail and F&B areas. We wanted to break them down into small shop houses to capture a very, very similar flavor. So those people who are walking from Holland Village into the site will feel a very, very similar type of environment. Okay, and then we take that idea and give the idea a slightly more modern spin. Okay, and we think about how the places will feel at daytime and at nighttime when the lights turn on. Because thinking about the project that you guys have, another thing about millennials is that you guys young people like to work in flexi time. You guys like to start the day a little bit later and work through the night. So how a place feels during the daytime and nighttime is going to be very, very important is going to be very, very important, and how it can transform, I think, would be quite, how a place can transform from one to the other would be quite interesting. But apart from traditional F&B spaces, we were also asked to design a co-work space. So a co-work space, and part of the project also asked us to design a residential tower. So we then thought about how do we translate this idea of smaller scale modules and how to translate them into big box program. Okay? So we took the idea of the proportions of a shop house as an architectural module, and we played around with them to create the profile of our co-work building. So our co-work building actually has a cinema located at the theater, and one of the things that we did was that we designed it as a series of modules that gradually terraced upwards. And the reason for that, and one of the perks that people talk about when they talk about co-work spaces, they want to talk about areas where there are these places with nice pantries where they can meet people who are also like-minded, having their own small business, and have opportunities to collaborate. So we basically designed areas that can become outdoor meeting rooms, or part of them are as recreational amenities that the people can actually enjoy when they're actually using the spaces. Okay. And then basically we plop them up and we put it up on stilts, floating over the shop houses. So that's kind of like how we imagined it. Okay. So that's how we tried to design something that's a little bit more specific, wanted to break away from very, very traditional way of doing things. We didn't want to just do a lumpy office block or a lumpy shopping center department store filled with restaurants and bars. Try to break the genericness of the way we go about in the design process. The next thing I want to talk about is designing for place, because I think your competition, one of the interesting things about the competition is that you guys have selected, or the organizers have selected a very, very unique place. I would say even borderline unusual, of choosing Coney Island as the location for your co-work space. Okay. Now, of course, we know that I think it's been in the papers and online for some time. The government is planning for a digital district very nearby in Punggol, where there will be an MRT station, another MRT station, opening up to that digital district. And our site is actually in Coney Island. So